Okay guys, so I want to talk about Vray environment fog now. This is something that's a huge component in all environments that we do at Blur, and I would like to share our kind of techniques and methodologies with you. Hopefully everybody has installed the Onion and has the Onion working. If you have render elements working additionally, that will serve you well. But that withstanding, you can still take away some of these techniques that we use and use them on a day-to-day basis. So I've taken the week 6 first pass file that I was using to demonstrate last week, and I've simply added a group, an atmosphere group, and I've added one layer that is ATM fog visible. Now you might be saying, well, Chad, why have you added a layer? Because environment fog is underneath effects, and that has nothing to do with layers. Well, at Blur it does. Okay, so how we turn these on and off and set up our passes and all of that stuff, this environment tab can be tied to any layer that you want. So all you need to do is say add, and we are going to add a Vray environment fog, and you'll see right now that it's active. And if I come over here to my newly created ATM fog visible layer, and I'll explain why I have one that's called visible and why I'm going to make another one that's called invisible, you'll see here after I right click I have manage effects, manage atmospherics. And when you click on that, you'll be presented with this Vray environment fog. Say I want to add that. And first thing I'm going to do is rename this and say this is visible. So visible, what is this? This is going to be the Vray fog that I'm going to composite with. Okay? It's not going to be turned on in my scene all of the time though, and I don't want it affecting my lighting. I do want it to be affected by lighting, but I don't want it affecting my lighting. So there is an option down here, affect camera rays, and you can turn this off, in which case you can have a Vray fog in the scene. It is acting on the scene, and it is occluding light and inhibiting light from passing through it, but when you render, you will not see it. Okay, so I'm going to show you. So now I've tied one Vray environment fog visible. That guy is tied to ATM fog visible. Now if I turn this layer off, something important happens. This guy becomes unchecked active. If I turn him on, he becomes checked active. Okay, so now I'm going to create a new layer. I have lots of layers, and I'm going to call this ATM fog invisible. So this is the fog that I might use when I actually render my environment, but I don't want it visible all the time because I'd like to be able to composite it and do with it what I'd like, you know, in post, make it stronger or weaker, or use mats to, to tweak it, stuff like that. All the things that we do. All right, so I've got my fog visible. Now I'm going to, and I'll get into these settings. I'm going to make a new one. Unfortunately, you can't copy these guys. You can't do anything, so it's just like set one up and then hope the other one works. Obviously, copy the settings from the other one. You don't hope the other one works. And I'm going to name this one invisible. And again, right-click, manage atmospherics. I want to manage the invisible one with this. So again, if I hide that layer, this guy is no longer active, which means he's not going to render. He's not going to do anything. Okay, so let's start with visible. So I turn the layer on, he is active, and we have a fog distance of 8 foot, and so let's just say I want to render with these kind of standard settings. I have quick render open on my second monitor, if you're wondering. Obviously it'll tell you quick render, but just so you know, that's why it's magically rendering. And there we go. It's kind of slow. And one important thing to look at when you're kind of evaluating your fog is your alpha. Okay, so what it's doing in the RGB is certainly pertinent, but basically right now this is a very small fog. It's like 10 feet, 8'4" precisely, and it's centered around the origin basically of 8 feet wide and 8 feet tall. So I have this just kind of mass sitting there. If you want it to be more distributed, as in you don't want this like dense, because the alpha is going to tell you like how dense this is, right? And this is, you know, directly going to affect your render times. So let's make this a little bit more gray. The lighting and everything is going to affect that. Now, if I say like I want this guy to be 1,000 feet, you're going to see this alpha change from basically solid white to, wait for it, to this. So we have a thick haze on the ground, and then it kind of slowly falls off toward this 8'4" ceiling. And then you can see in the color. So now if I also tweak my height, let's say 100 feet, now you're going to see it's going to become denser for a larger portion of time. Voila. And you can see how that alpha changed, right? So these two numbers, this is the fog height, so this is how tall the fog is, and is basically controlling your fall off, you know, from 0, 0, 0. This is all going to be based around a Z0. So if your environment is sitting up at 400 feet or something like that, and you go to use environment fog and you tell it, well, I want that thing to be 100 feet, you're going to render and you're not going to see anything. And you're like, what the fuck? And the what the fuck is, you're only 100 feet and you're 400 feet up in the air, and in order to get that same 100-foot equivalent, you would have to add the 400-foot Z translation that you've got on top of this fog height. Right? So hopefully that makes sense. But you can see our alpha change. And I'm going to say maybe 50 feet for this. And step size of 4 inches. This is going to kind of directly affect your step size and your fog distance. These guys go hand in hand. So if you start to get really big and large in scale, you're going to want to adjust this step size so that it's marching through. It's basically, I think this is kind of like ray marching or something. I mean, V-Ray is not a ray marcher, but this defines like the detail level as it steps through this fog, and 4 inches is good for a lot of stuff, but some things I've gone as high as like 2 feet in environments where, you know, it's, this number will only go up to, what is it, 83,000, I think something like that, like, yeah, 83,300 feet and 4 inches. I certainly meet that cap often enough in some of the larger environments, and in those larger environments, sometimes you'll render it and you'll be like, this just doesn't look like anything, or your objects aren't occluding it correctly, and the way to counteract that is to adjust this step size, and by bringing that step size up to 1 foot, 2 foot, depending on the scale of your scene, that will help to kind of rein in the environment fog. Okay. So 50 feet, I want to scatter GI. Let's render. Probably not going to see much of a difference. Oh, well, I adjusted my fog height to 50 feet, so we are going to see a difference. Always be looking at your alpha on this. And right now I'm just looking at this in kind of in a vacuum, right? So let's say I'm starting to become happy with this, and I need it to, you know, interact with my environment. So the next thing I'm going to do is come in and turn some of these guys on. And then I'm going to add an alternate material. Oh, that's interesting. It does it different in this. Okay, there we go. Oh, no, sorry. I want to delete that alternate material. Yes. Sorry, I'm not used to working with this onion, so give me 1 sec. Copy to. Alright, so I want to define an alt material, not add an alt material, and that's the same in both onions. I do that every damn time. I always want to, like, well, I want to add the attribute. So I'm going to define one, and it's taking a minute. So I'm just going to create a new Vray material, and he'll be gray. And yes, I want to apply that to this alt material. So this is just a Vray gray shader. The reason we do this is so that when we set this to be matte object and all of that, we're not calculating reflections and things that we don't need in fog. Fog doesn't reflect or refract or, you know, give a shit. You want a proper alpha, but you don't need to be calculating all of those other things in the scene. Furthermore, you don't need to be loading maps. Our system for submitting to the farm, if you submit it like this, it will delete all stuff that isn't visible in your scene, that doesn't have a dependency, and then it's going to strip out your maps and all that stuff. So that works out very well for us. All right, and then I want to copy. I don't want. This guy doesn't need it. I want to copy this to the visible layers, right? And we've talked about like indexing these, and if you make one, copy it to all of the others. Okay, so now all of these have a gray material on them. And then next, I want to set them all as matte objects. And in the instance of speeding up, or in the interest, not the instance, the interest of speeding this render up, I'm going to turn off my hero tree because I don't feel like letting it calculate the meta mesh. But otherwise, leave all of this the same, and I would turn on visible. Okay, so this would be my first fog pass. This is how I would set this up. I would have everything a gray shader, and everything set matte object, -1 alpha, so on and so forth. And now let's render. Obviously, it's going to take a couple minutes more. Okay, more than a couple minutes. I want to see what kind of detail we're getting around here, because this will help us define how big of a fog we actually want in the end. And some of it's to taste, you know. You might want a more foggy scene, and I think in general, like, get in the habit of using fog, though. You definitely want it, even if you aren't trying to go for a foggy scene. This level of atmosphere and that it adds on top really gives a level of realism that's very important. That's interesting. I'm guessing there's something, that piece of geo. Oh, yeah, there we go. Got some geo missing. I think when I set this up, I missed a piece of geo. He's not in the right layer. Okay, so let's say I want this to be a little bit tighter, right? So one thing I can do, I can bring my height down, right? We talked about that. And then I can also make this not as large. I'm just going to define a smaller area to render here. The other thing I'm going to do is, we often do this. I know I turned on scatter GI, but we frequently do this without GI. There's certainly always exceptions to the rules. So you'll see I have less variation now. It's kind of, when I say tightened up, there's more kind of fog everywhere. So you can see that if you wanted less fog everywhere, I just want to be clear in what I was getting at. So tightening it up meaning more fog. Now, if I said like 3,000 feet here, you'll see like this is going to be more black. This is going to, like, it's going to start to even maybe resemble like a Z depth pass. And certainly a lot of people will use a Z depth in this fashion to kind of try to mimic what a fog is doing. And that's fine. Problem with it being, though, that you can, when you have like people moving around, running around, characters doing shit, jumping all over the place, the edging on a depth pass can be less than perfect, in which case your fog is going to be your kind of best friend. Let's render for a second. Now you'll see, like, this is much darker here now. And I achieved that by changing my fog distance, right? So these two numbers, your fog distance, your fog height, they're very important, okay? They're going to control the fall off vertically and the fall off, you know, horizontally through your environment of the fog. The other thing that you want to consider is, right now I'm overriding samples on my quick render. I don't want to do that. Subdivisions. So I know Akin talked to you guys about DMC subdivisions, and Vray fog is no different. It's also got its own subdivisions. Oftentimes, you know, 16 or 24, 32, you're going to need this. Right now you can see this like grain in here. So to get this guy clean, you're going to have to tweak your subdivisions. I often as far as my min and max values. You can play with these quite a bit. You don't have to have all of this stuff set super crazy in order to get a clean fog pass. What's going to clean it is this subdivision number. Now, I certainly have seen, like, it will only go as high as 2048. Like, if I try to make it... Oh, fuck off. Haha! Call me a liar. Alright, well, in the past, it's only gone as high as 2048. Cool. You'll find that sometimes you might have some pretty extreme numbers in that subdivision amount in order to get it clean. That's interesting. This is another complaint of V-Ray fog, is that it's grainy and dirty and whatever, and that's because people don't understand how to make it clean, and this is it's still dirty. So I'm gonna go 248. And there you go. Nice and buttery, right? That, we've gone from here to here. And the render time really didn't suffer all that much, but that is the proper way to clean this guy up. So, this is your visible fog, right? As I said, this is the pass that you're going to render out just like this. It's going to look like this, and you're going to send it to your compositing package, and you will plus this over, grade by it, do whatever you want to do to your original image. You can make multiples of these, some that are looser, some that are like longer. You can also add gizmos into these. We don't use these gizmos a whole ton, but I'm going to show it just in the interest of being thorough. Alright, so you can, where are they under helpers? Yeah, atmospheric apparati. And you can add a box gizmo, right? And you can say, and we could put them in a pertinent layer. That would be important. Let's set them in here. Alright, so we can make this kind of custom volume. And then we can come to this fog visible, and instead of having it like have this general distance, you can tell it I want it to use this box. So now I'm using this box, and you can have this per gizmo fade out if you want, or it will respect the gizmo fall off radius here. Okay? So now if we come back and we look through our camera, I bring my frame buffer back, and we render it. Now it's using that box gizmo. Ah, fuck. Oh, that's the upper trees. No big deal. Pardon my potty mouth. Oh, no, it's not exactly the same. There, we saw it shift. It was actually pretty damn similar though. The difference being back here, it was because the distance before was much larger. Alright. And this is still going to have some effect on it, but ultimately this gizmo is kind of what's controlling where it's going to originate and how. So this like fog height, you'll see this guy is now null and void. So if you were like 450 feet up in the air, what you can do is say, well, I don't want to, I no longer want to have to worry about, being near the origin, but I want my fog distance still. I want to have that sort of distribution, but I want it to have a definitive end. And you can see here these couple of buckets that finished rendering. The reason they're brighter like this and their alpha is going to be a little bit stronger than it was before is that they have a definitive end. And their end, even though this guy has a fall off set by this fog distance that is still exactly as I said it before, it still has a definitive end at this box's edge. Hopefully that makes sense. But if we rendered this in kind of a perspective view, you would see that, let's go out, it's here in fact. I'll show you the fog is going to like stop at the edges of this box. So therefore, it's got like an alpha buildup when you come to these edges. And that's an important thing to consider when you're using these gizmos, if you are using them. It's not going to have the same like natural fall off to the distance that not using a box gizmo will give you. You can certainly use these fall off radiuses and stuff, and you can see it's got a little bit of a, somewhat of a natural fall off, but it still gives you a buildup that you don't necessarily want. Come on. Okay, so that is our fog visible. So that's a compositing layer, okay? The next thing that we're going to set up is fog invisible. Now, normally I set this up just like I'll mimic whatever I did in my invisible. I will do, or my visible I do for my invisible, so I'll set this to 1000. And I actually don't want to use a gizmo. Fog height of 50, right? 25. 248. Step size should be fine. The big difference for this guy is effect camera rays will be turned off. Okay, so this is my invisible fog, and it's something that goes along with your beauty, your environment beauty, your character beauties, all that stuff. You will have this turned on when you render your foreground. And in some cases, depending on how you set this up, you might see a difference and you might not. It's all in how thick you made this and what type of fall off you gave it in the first place. But when we use this, so as I said, you would you'd set up your foreground layer. I would still have midground stuff. I wouldn't have these guys. Turn off all of this stuff. Make this guy not visible. Oh, this onion is brutal. I'm spoiled. Alright, so let's just say this is the case. So when I go to render my eBeauty or my environment, I will have fog invisible, which is a replica of fog visible, set active. So we know it's active because ATM invisible. I keep saying visible when I mean to say invisible. Sorry about that. But affect camera rays is unchecked. And now if I come to the camera and we turn this guy back on, let's save. So we will often have like multiple fogs. This can also control fume effects and turning on the FusionWorks renderer and stuff. There's a lot of reasons, you know, or a lot of things that the Onion does for us, and why I've had you guys use it or advised you to use it. So if I render now. In this case, there might not be much of a difference. But, as I said, depending on how thick you made your fog and all of that, this can help to stop rays. Oh, there's pretty much no difference at all. That's pretty awesome. Sweet. Uh-oh, it did start to render. My stuff's not... God. So smart. It was rendering. I'm impatient, and it was rendering a rock wall that's not visible to camera. But in this case, you're probably not going to see much of a difference. But as I said, it will, in situations where you have a very dense fog, it will help to kind of occlude those rays. Okay, so that's V-Ray fog, V-Ray environment fog in the context of your environments. You and your V-Ray fog. Use it, set it up, mess with it. Super duper important. Okay? Alright, let's step over to this side. Ooh. And again, let's make a sphere gizmo. So this is a atmospheric apparatus. And view from selection. Oops. ATM fog map. Okay, so the other thing you can do, just organize this real quick. Wait very patiently, is you can add a V-Ray environment fog. Alright, so these guys are, this guy's not active, we want this guy to be active, we want him to manage atmospherics. Alright, and in the fog density, I'm going to add a map. I'm going to click the button and wait. Either or. It's, same thing. I'm gonna wait a long time. I'm really glad that they improved the material editor in 2014. I have to say. Bang up job, guys. Okay, so let's see. Did the electric come? Bummer. I was hoping that the electric map that we have at Blur, it's one of the Blur maps, would have come along with the Blur dev tools. It appears it does not. So that sucks. You can do it with noise. You can do it. You can do this with lots of maps. Looking for an empty slot. It doesn't really matter though. I'm going to just add some contrast. And let's start with that. All right, so this is noise map in the density of my fog. Let's just turn this stuff off so it doesn't have to worry about the verts. Oh, dope. Thinking. Too impatient for that shit. Okay, so something is not set correct, obviously, because it's taking for fucking ever to render. Okay, so let's rectify that problem. Most often, it's something in the like fog height or the oh, you know, I didn't set this guy to use that gizmo, so first thing that's going to screw me. So I'll start by just tweaking the fog distance and see if that yields a quicker result. Once you start to use these maps, things are going to slow down. You're going to see them slow down, and this texture sample is going to become significantly more important. It's also going to slow your shit down, though, the more samples that you have, but it will help it to be more accurate, ultimately. All of that for that tiny bucket. I want a little bit of it to render just so we have something to compare against. Ain't nobody got time for this. Alright, I'm going to bang up the step size. So it's slightly faster, not going to be as accurate per se, but some of it, I think, like the scale of that object. Okay, so there we go. We've got some shit to compare. I think I went quicker than these guys. All right, so it doesn't necessarily look like much. So slightly changing the color is not going to change the time. But by making that fog distance bigger, that's making it less concentrated. You know, it's less that it's got to solve. But now I've got, like, you know, no fog. What happened to my fog? And once you start to put maps in here, this does get considerably slower. Just so you know, nobody would tell you that this doesn't slow your shit down significantly. Often what I'll do for, if I'm really going after some, like a look, I will turn off my lights and stuff when I go to use this and really just work with the alpha. And I can show you, like, the difference here that turning off the light will make. Because depending on what you're doing exactly, you might not need the light. And what you're really going for is kind of the look, that kind of alpha, those fine lines and stuff that you can get with this. So now you'll see, like, bam, that shit is fast, right? And in the alpha, it looks very similar. If I go to my RGB, like, it's lacking the shadows and other stuff that you're going to get. But you might not care. So sometimes, depending on what you're doing in your scene, like, this could be totally fucking black too. So don't rely too much on your RGB. I would really just look at that alpha. So the next thing, like, I would say like 1,000 or something. But this is a way to get very cool looks, and it can be a, you know, 100% 3D kind of. Too big. Shocking. 32 to 1,000. This is a natural progression. I generally, though, I want to say, like, going from far-reaching extremes, like, that's often the quickest way to discover, like, where you want to be. I never do, like, well, it was 32, now I'm gonna go to 40. Like, no. Alright, so let's say, like, this is kind of what we're going for, right? But it's got some banding in it, and it's not my favorite. So I might want some more contrast in this. And second, I'm going to crank this texture samples value. and you'll see this banding is going to go away, or it's going to begin to go away. It's significantly less. And if we crank this up to 16, and this is the type of thing that in if you had the light on and all that stuff and you start wrenching this number like way up, your times are gonna go fucking through the roof. Still seeing it. Some of this might be how much I cranked on this guy, but it should still. Oh, well, my subdivisions are also super low right now. Did not help. It could be this relationship that I've constructed here that is creating this. One thing's for sure, I don't normally go much beyond 12 on that. Yeah, what I've done in the texture has built this into it. One way to get rid of that would be lessening the detail in this guy. Should help. Let's just say 4. Still not so much. Yeah. No, go back to fractal. I'm also 400%, but you know, I don't like banding as much as the next guy. At 100%, it's really pretty much not there, but as much as we can get rid of this stuff, I like to. If I said we didn't pixel fuck stuff at Blur, I'd be lying. That, in fact, seemed to have made it worse. Seemed to like 6. So some of this is like, you know, trial and error, and kind of depends the map, depends on what you're doing. But at this point, you guys should get the idea of what, you know, what I'm going at here. How to use these maps, what to do, what not to do, what to do with some caution, specifically setting up these maps and then also trying to use the light in tandem with it. Depending on the look you're going for, you could color it in post. You could do a lot of stuff to this where, you know, the light and those minuscule little shadows on a mostly transparent thing just aren't going to contribute that much, and it's really the dimension and the depth that you're going for. So learn to to compromise and be strategic when you're dealing with fog in these, in the capacity of trying to manipulate maps and things like that with it. I'll frequently do a shuffle, send this into the RGB inside of Nuke, and then color or use it as the alpha and pre-mult a constant by this alpha to get what I want. Let me, in fact, instead of telling you, let's just save this guy to my desktop, or we'll just put him right here. Testes, testing. Permit my Nuke to take for fucking ever to open. Alright. Yeah, no, serious, it takes forever. If you needed to pee for the last 53 minutes, you could go and do it. And when you come back, it's still going to be sitting here. Most instructors would pause it, but not me. So annoying. Just gonna save this. Still not open. I can make the sphere dance. Come on. Okay, well, I was going to show you. It's basically, you take the image, you take a constant, any color, and you use this guy's alpha, and then pre-mult it. So you just chop all of the RGB data by the alpha data, and then you have a colored version of what you... Oh. Fuck you so much, Nuke. Alright. So, tab. If you guys don't know Nuke very well, I know I'm not giving a very good intro to how to use Nuke, but tab, this guy, and then if you start typing grade, or color correct, those are kind of the... This is called a constant. And, oops, you can make it a color. K makes this copy node, which I love. Alright, so now you'll see my, I've got a background, it's red, and if I hit A, you'll see my alpha, and What's the format of this guy? 1280. So I hit S, that'll bring up my settings, and I'm going to make the format not 2048 by 2048, 1280 by 720. So then my my constant is also using the root format, so he's going to be 1280 by 720. So now if I view this, here is my alpha. God damn it, not fusion. If you hit A and A again, it brings you back to your RGB. In Fusion, if you hit A, you have to hit C for color to take you back to the RGB. So that's what I keep cursing about. I keep hitting C, and that is not a hotkey in Nuke. And then pre-molt this guy, and there you go. There you go. There you have it. This is your color that you have made this thing, and you're just using this as alpha data. Okay? So, real quick, stupid example, but you could, you know, maybe you want it to be blue. Right? You could do stuff with this, and then you can glow it. I'm hitting Fusion hotkeys. Ooh. There are lots of places that you could go with this. So, that's that in a nutshell. Alright, and with that, that's going to conclude our V-Ray fog. Well, do I want to do fume effects? Yes, I do. I'm feeling frisky. So, we're going to do... Let's talk about fume effects real quick. If my shit will open. Alright. So, we use fume a lot. Not just to kind of blow shit up, which obviously we use it for that, but we also use it in environments. And what do I mean by that? So I'm gonna make a new layer. I'm gonna make a couple of new layers, unless my stuff crashes. Sure. Okay, and these aren't really, they're not effects layers in that, you know, they're moving around and blowing up. We will also often use, like still fume grids, but place them to give, you know, the scene depth in addition to, you know, the fog. So the fog will give you kind of an overall, but if you place these like fume grids around in your shot, didn't do what I wanted to do. It can help to give a texture that a fume or that a fog just isn't going to give you. Alright, so now I've got, hopefully Fume Effects is running on my machine. As you guys know, I like to do this stuff, so you, like as if we're working at the office. I don't really do, like, pre-canned shit where you just get to watch me regurgitate something that I've already done. So because of that, sometimes shit explodes. Alright. But that's working. I mean, that is working in the biz. Alright. So, real quick. What this is not a intro to fume effects or how I did my fume effects. I don't have time for that. I'm sorry. I'd love to show you guys everything under the sun, but I mean, just doing fume alone, you know, Alan McKay has done years and years of tutorials and hours of videos on that single subject. So I will try to, if you happen to notice here, week's bonus fume effects, I will try to get to some of this in some bonus material I'd like to put out for you guys for like week 9 or 10, or we'll see, something down the road. I also want to go on a vacation. So but it will be something coming. That said, I want this fume grid. Yes. Alright. And what did I do? 0 to 240, so I want to do, like, let's say, well, let's keep it 0 to 240 and just start writing 30. So this is just telling it hold frame 130. Double check what frames. What did I do? Oh, I only did 50 frames of this guy. Alright, well. Alright. So now we have a fume grid, and it's just a static grid at this point. So I have my playback. These are all static numbers, and I set my before and start, so it's just holding that frame. So no matter what frame I go to, you're going to see the exact same fume grid. And these guys are great because it gives, as I said, like, I don't want to render. Well, that's fine. You can see like a texture to the scene that fog is not giving. So let me grab my wavelet. Yes. And let's read from that cache. Probably didn't sim as much wavelet, I'm guessing. Yes, only to frame 41. Damn it, Chad. Oops. There we go. Now I got a wavelet. right, so um, I want to move quick, but I'm all I'm doing is on the render tab tweaking the smoke settings here. I've tweaked my GI. This guy, if you right click on him, you can get a key mode, and that'll give you basically like this gradient, right? And you can set flags in it just like you can in any normal gradient. You can also set curves on this, or if you don't do anything at all, it's going to use the color to affect the opacity. Further, I've just told it to cast shadows, receive shadows. I'm just going to continue to tweak the opacity here until I see like the kind of level of detail that I'm looking for. So this is just a grid that I made off of the particles that were emitted from the waterfall. So basically, like particles that fell down and came within a certain distance of the ground and also had a certain velocity. I kept those, deleted everything else, and then used those as emitters for fume effects to emit particles off of. So that's what you're seeing right now. But you can also take these guys and in your scene, like move them around, and you can also scale them. This is something I don't recommend going too crazy on, but we absolutely do this. Just gonna move some stuff out of the way. You know, because we have like a library of this stuff, of these fume grids. But you can take this and you can scale it and bring it down. Normally scaling down is not as much of a problem as scaling up. And you can see, like, I might want to like kind of set this off screen, and you know, once you've got like some cool stuff going on with the plants, plus like a little bit of fume over top, you could really start to get some nice results. And it doesn't even have to be moving, but it gives you a good texture on top of that fog. So what would I do with this? Just like the fog, in fact, almost identical. The biggest difference being that fume requires its own lights, and yes, with V-Ray now and Fume now, you can use a V-Ray dome. I would not recommend it to you. The samples in the dome need to be super low in order to get like speedy renders. We've done a number of tests with this, and we are still using standard lights. So as tempting as it is to use an HDRI that, you know, we're using maybe in the environment to light stuff, we still just come in and add our own lighting and light rigs. We often also use shadow map, for those of you that kind of know. Within the spotlight, I always forget where this guy is. In shadow parameters, atmosphere shadows, you're going to want this turned on so that it will cast shadows in your fume effects. And then additionally, so that fume effects is aware of that light, you have to, on your illumination tab, click it and pick it. Okay, so now fume effects knows that that thing exists, that light exists. And I've got my FusionWorks renderer here, and I haven't set this up, but you'll see I've got right now an active fume effects FusionWorks renderer there. So what I want to do is manage effects, or is it nope, sorry, These are the same thing in the new Onion, so I apologize. FusionWorks renderer. And say okay. So now if I turn that guy on, turn him off, we're good. And then I've got my atmosphere, so I'm going to rename this guy ATM ground lobe. Just going to quickly save. And by quickly, I mean, you know, whatever Max decides to do. So I've set this guy up in this set relationship, and let me see what other layers I have turned on here. So again, I'm going to set these guys to gray. I'm going to set them to matte, and I want to render. Sorry, I'm moving stuff on my other monitor. And there are reasons that I save when I save, such as before I go to render a fume grid. It will just crash. It's pretty awesome. All right. Okay, so what I've discovered here is that, well, I'm only looking at the alpha there. If I were like doing this, I want this grid to be kind of more in that shit. So, it's pretty well in it. I'm gonna make it more. It could just be where that grid is. There we go. Now you're gonna show up. And I think that its opacity still can be tweaked pretty substantially. Obviously, the light too is going to have an impact on that. And for things like this where it's more like textural, I don't set the opacity like really thick, or I might tweak it in post once I set this pass up. So let's say it was like it's going to be a foreground smoke. I'd have everything that I need for my foreground layer set to a gray shader and to matte object, just like you would for the fog. And you can, I hope you guys are starting to see, like, you know, the dependencies that we get going here are pretty elaborate. And the number of passes, like, we'll have a lot of passes that define a single shot, and it's smoke passes, fog passes, environment, characters, multiple characters. If there's 15 characters in a shot, you know, those are all broken out into different hierarchies. You get the idea. So this is kind of still too much. It's all about like adding volume, and of course you could just set this up like this and then send it over to Nuke Fusion and grade your alpha in post, or grade, you know, just kind of the overall image. And then for things like this, I would plus it over, or grade, as I was talking about in the last lesson, add a grade and use the alpha as a mask, and, you know, just ever so slightly gain up or gamma up depending on the look that you're going for. but I'll often have, you know, numerous grids. And when I say numerous grids, I'm really meaning, like, I would copy this guy like 5 times. So here's like legitimate workflow, okay? Don't like, oh man, I need like smoke here, smoke there, smoke all over the place. Great. Alright, so first, save. Because what I'm going to do will crash your shit. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But basically, you take the same grid, you copy it multiple times, and you change this this value here, this start frame, play from, these guys, make them like 38, so that the smoke is different than it was on the other frame. Or you simply rotate it, like what this smoke looks like from this, you know, from this angle. If you spun it around and rotated it and caught it from the other side, it's going to look dramatically different. So taking the same grid, copying it, rotating it, and scaling it, layering it up on top of itself, that's the way that we work. We don't just like go out and grab 15 different grids out of our library and like attempt to put all of those into one shot. Also, you would find that your scene kind of comes to a halt pretty quickly. Let's see if it crashes. Yay, it didn't. Alright, so as I said, I would, you know, come in here. Oops. Rotate this guy. And, that's not what I wanted. Also, simultaneously, like, set this to 35. So now the grid is going to be slightly different, and it's also rotated. And further, you can scale it and do, you know, whatever else you would like to do. You saw it jump there because it just needed to refresh its cache. When I changed its frame, in the viewport it hadn't updated. So it's not that it's animated, it was just updating the cache. So that is Fume Effects. Again, now that this guy's copied, he's going to be pointing and looking at that exact same light, so that works out really well for you when you copy these around. Don't go for more than, like, well, it depends how detailed, like what type of spacing and the size of the grid as to how many you want, but generally like 3 to 5 in a single render is a good kind of rule of thumb. And then I'll layer them up. Like I might have 3 in the foreground, a couple in the midground, and then a number of them in the distance, if that makes sense. Each one of those would be their own separate, like I'd have ATM fume ground low foreground, ATM fume foreground low midground, etc. And I'd render those as separate passes because if you add too many of them, it becomes kind of like a diminishing return on your render. What was a 20-minute render becomes an hour-and-a-half render. Add another one, and what was an hour-and-a-half render becomes a 4-hour render. Add another one, you know, and you get the point. It just becomes obscene to the point where it makes more sense to have like a 20-minute render, another 20-minute render, and another 20-minute render, because if you need to change, like this is decidedly like that one grid isn't working, we want to update that. You only have a 20-minute render as opposed to if you had copied this thing like 10 times and it's a 4-hour render and you can't isolate that one. You can keep your other passes and you can update that one pass. Hopefully that makes sense, but that's important stuff. Like don't try to bite off more than your current farm and can chew, basically. And it just doesn't make sense iteratively to go beyond like 20 minutes or so. Like I generally start to try to break things up as much as I possibly can so that if I need to make a little change, I can. Okay, so that is Fume Effects very quickly, but kind of how we use it, what we do, adjusting the layers or setting up the layers, how you manage it, rendering it. I would render something very similar to this, and as I said, take it into post, lay it over, plus it over top, or add it, depending on what software you're using, and then tweak my alpha to get the results that I'm looking for. And it's more subtle stuff. Oh, that's nice. Thank you, GoToMeeting, for spamming me in the middle of my shit. Fuck off. Alright, so that is Fume Effects and V-Ray Environment Fog.